Hey everybody, welcome to Big Boys Toys. I'm James. We're out in the garage today and we're going to do a tour of all the 928s. I'm going to let you know what's up with each of them, what the future plans are for them, and kind of what's going on with each car, and maybe even how they sound when we start them up, if they'll start. Let's do this. So here's the 1978 928. It's got an automatic transmission. I know everybody thinks, oh, automatic transmission. They all have automatic transmissions, or at least 90% of them have automatic transmissions. Well, that's completely incorrect information. Actually, in the 78 model year, only about 10% had an automatic transmission. So this is actually kind of the rarest of the rare here, because it's a Survivor 78. It's a Euro model, has no side markers on it, as you can see. It has about 65,000 miles on it, if I recall correctly. I think it's 56 on the US odometer, and then when we took it all apart, there was a note that said the odometer had been replaced, or the Euro odometer had been replaced at 6,600 kilometers. So it actually may be closer to 60,000 miles. It has the Porsche interior, and it's not running very smoothly right now, but that's my fault, because the 93, which is parked outside behind this car, isn't hardly running at all. So we can't move the 93 to take the 78 out. And so it's running very rough right now. It basically needs what we refer to as a Italian tune-up, where you just go out and drive the damn thing. So unfortunately, it's going to sit for a little while longer, and otherwise, it's a really, really nice car. We redid the Porsche interior completely. Jim Dorr at 928 Classics, he did the work on this car, and it's a wonderful little car. I really enjoy it. It's number 295, so that means it's the 285th 928 that was built ever, and I bought it out of Pennsylvania, and I've owned it since 2012. Yeah, since early 2012. Next up is a 1984 928S. This is a US Spec car, as you can tell from the side markers at the front part of the front bumper. I've got it tucked into the garage pretty tightly. You can see I have managed to get it right up next to that wall. Doesn't happen all the time, but occasionally I get lucky when I pull one of these things in and I get it put right where I like it. Anyway, this is also a great car. It is running a little rough right now too. I think it may have a vacuum leak. We'll do a little video on this one shortly, and you can see what it's like to drive it. It's generally one of my best running cars. When the battery is up on it, you just turn the key and it starts right up. But this last week, when we've had to move it a few times, it's been a little bit less smooth, shall we say. Up, you can hear the idle kind of surging a little bit. Not atypical for these old cars. And it's taken a little while for it to work itself out. But it's also a wonderful car. I've owned this one since 2006. It has 114,000 miles on it, I think. We did the vinyl front seat kit that you could get off of eBay back in the 2000s. And it's an okay kit. It wasn't installed very well. A friend of mine did it, and he didn't spend as much time making this part up here fit right as he did in his own car. His car looked better than this one. But, you know, we can redo that. And frankly, I'd like to find the leather kit and go back to full leather. I had the dash redone recently. It's got a new timing belt, the dash and the glove box cover, actually. But unfortunately, the vinyl grain doesn't match the grain of the leather. So I'm not super happy with it, but it was the best we could do. I didn't have the money and the time to spend messing around looking for anything else. So anyway, it was the best we could do at the time, and it looks much better than it did. It had 3 terrible cracks and a couple more that were less terrible, but still pretty big cracks in it. So I'm glad that it's done. I guess the answer is to just get the center console portion done the same way as the dashboard. I would love to redo the steering wheel as well. It's not the smoothest or softest leather anymore, as you would expect from an old car. And the stereo needs to be redone. But, you know, at least the timing belt and water pump are changed out, and it runs great once it gets running and has some time to warm up. And it's just a really fun car to drive, too. In fact, we'll talk about it some more in the video of this car. The early cars, the 78 and the 84, are much lighter and more nimble on their tires, or their toes, if you will, than the S4s and GTSs, in my opinion. At least all the ones I've driven, the early 80s cars, late 70s, early 80s cars, they really do feel more like a even better balanced, more comfortable 911. Whereas the newer cars, the S4s and GTSs, they feel like touring cars. They feel like great, wonderful, grand touring cars, but they're not what I would call light or nimble. The S4 is an 88 model, and it was my very first Porsche. It obviously has aftermarket wheels on it, except they're actually Porsche factory wheels from a 911, an 02 to 04 911. So you can see at the front, they don't quite fit as well as one would hope. They stick out a little bit too much. The back fits just fine though, and I love the look of this wheel. It's an 18-inch wheel, and I think it really updates the look of the car and makes it look even more modern than it otherwise would. This car has always run spectacularly well. It was my track car for years and years, and I put over 10,000 track miles on it. It has 98,000 miles on it now. It needs a timing belt and a water pump again pretty soon, unfortunately. So that's going to be a service that's going to have to be done sooner rather than later. And it needs its suspension raised up a touch. It was lowered for track work, and I think it has sagged a bit more, even beyond how much we had lowered it in the first place. So it needs to be raised back up, and then it's going to need an alignment, and then the timing belt and water pump, and it'll be good to go for another 10 years. It's got new tires on it, and it sounds wonderful. Anybody who's put a rear muffler bypass on an 88, and I think it's 88 and 89 or 87 and 88, I don't remember exactly, but the 88s for sure, they just sound so good with simply a rear muffler bypass on it. The interior of the car is pretty nice. It's the linen interior, the linen in black. And unfortunately, the linen gets dirty pretty quickly. And of course, when you're doing track days, maybe not every track, but around here in Central Texas, when you would do track days, you had to leave the windows open. And I went off track several times. I mean, when you've got 10,000 track miles and you're really pushing, eventually you are going to go off track. And I did several times, and it was very dusty off track. So unfortunately, I've probably got a slightly dirtier linen interior than the average 98,000 mile car with a linen interior. If you can see the mileage there, the odometer shows 60,000 miles. So you may be wondering why I said it has 98,000. That's because the odometer gear had to be replaced, and apparently they just replaced the whole odometer before I ever bought the car. And that odometer had 39,000 miles on it when it was replaced. There's a sticker in the door that shows what the old mileage was. Now, the 92 Euro GTS. This car has always been amazing, and it was the first fully registered 1992 in the United States. In fact, it's still the only fully registered 92 928 in the US, because now you can bring them in without EPA and DOT certification because they're over 25 years old. But I brought this one in 2000, and I had to fully EPA and DOT this car. So it is the only one that is fully EPA and DOT certified. Has 150,000 miles on it. And other than the rear muffler bypass and some interior bits and pieces, actually some of the same ones you saw in the S4 just a second ago, it's stock. Another fantastic car. And when you've had like this car to start with, it's easy to understand why you end up with a whole fleet of 928s, because a good 928 is an amazing car. And when you start with a good one, it's like, what is it? Lay's potato chips? You just can't stop with one, or whatever the commercial was for that. I love this car. I drove it in July of 2000 in Germany on the A95 between Garmisch-Partenkirchen and Munich. And if you're familiar with that particular bit of Autobahn, you know that it's 2 lanes in each direction separated by a small barrier, and that it winds its way up the river valley. And there's little towns and hamlets that you come through every few kilometers that cause you to have to slow down to, 70, 80 kilometers an hour. But in between those little hamlets, it's unlimited. But it's also not straight. I don't think there's a single straightaway on that road between Munich and Garmisch-Partenkirchen. And I got this bad boy up to 165 miles an hour, 267 kilometers an hour, I think is what that is. It was amazing. It was so solid and so smooth. It was unbelievable. We were burning gas so fast, you could actually watch the fuel needle go down. Current situation with this car is that it's got a shifting problem, but it's really funny because the problem shows up when you take a long or fast left-hander. So the last time I drove it, I didn't have any problems on about a 15-minute drive until I was really close to home. I took the last big sweeping left-hander before turning onto the road that leads to my neighborhood, and it would not shift up from second gear. I managed to get home fine, and then I tested it again, and it drove fine until that same left-hander again, and then it wouldn't shift out of second gear again. So I'm hopeful that it's simply fluid levels low, and that left-hander is causing the fluid to either not be picked up or slosh somewhere. It's one of those deals where you just hope for the best in a situation like that, because the worst is a new transmission. And I can't afford a new transmission right now. This car also is gonna need a timing belt in the near future. And I have a set of new front calipers for it. So you might be able to tell that the calipers are devoid of their pretty clear coat, and they look pretty sad right now. So we're gonna put brand new calipers on, and then these calipers will be for sale. So if any of you guys are interested in buying a set of front GTS calipers, I will have a set soon. And in fact, I've got a set of basically new rotors to go with it. So you can buy a pair of front calipers and new rotors. And I also have what I believe is a set of S4 rear calipers. So if you want a set of S4 rear calipers, which I understand are the same as the GTS rear calipers, I can set you up with a full set of GTS brakes. See, these calipers are fine. The ones that I have, I was gonna put on my race car, and then I never ended up doing it. But these are okay. So I'm not gonna change these out, just the fronts. Here's the interior. I've got the steering wheel was redone, the door inserts were redone, I put the new style buttons that were available for a while. I don't think they're available anymore on this car. They're backlit and they're really cool. I got the carbon fiber style. It's got the raised center console with, of course, the Porsche script there. Porsche script on the shift lever, put in a shift boot. Porsche script on the steering wheel. It's really set up. Unfortunately, those custom pieces faded differently from the rest of the car, so they don't match as well now as they did when they were new. Super smooth car. Drove this car from Austin to LA back in 2012, and it was just a blast. Just drove it straight through. I think I stopped at one rest stop and took a nap for a couple hours, and I had lunch with a friend, 928 friend, Rich Andrade. If you guys need a LH module rebuild, he does those in Phoenix, and then on to LA. An amazing trip, an amazing car. As I mentioned, the 93 is in the driveway in front of the 78 that's parked right here in front of me. And the situation on the 93 is that something is wrong. It sounds like it's running on half the cylinders, like on one bank. I'm hopeful that it's just the igniters, because they're very easy to change out. And I have a couple of cars that have the same igniters. I haven't done it yet, but I'm hopeful that that's the only problem. The car was, the last time I actually got to drive it, had a little hesitation. When you were going down the road, you'd just feel it, just barely, every now and then hesitate a little. So I don't know what that was from. Perhaps a vacuum leak, I guess, but I don't think so. I think it would have been more consistent if it were a vacuum leak, because it seemed fairly inconsistent. It also will need a timing belt in the next couple of years. The old girl sounds pretty good. And it has some interior bits and pieces that need to be taken care of. I'll probably put the supercharger back on it. Looks like I'm probably going to keep that car instead of selling it. It only has 30,000 miles and it's on a rebuilt title. So the car had been wrecked in Florida. It was a Canadian car and the guy that owned it would have it trucked from Quebec down to Florida so he didn't have to drive it that whole way. And then he'd drive it in Florida all winter, and then he'd ship it back up to Quebec when he went back home to Canada in the summertime and drive it up there. So it's a very interesting car with an interesting history, but it needs a full paint job. It needs some interior work, as I mentioned, and it needs a little mechanical work now too. So again, I don't know when we're gonna get to that. My wife is a real estate agent, and if you'd like to buy or sell a house in the Austin area and help my car situation by helping her career situation, or if you need a place to rent, give my wife a call. She's really good. But you know, she's new at it and it takes time to build clientele. And when that happens, then we'll get all this stuff redone. Hey, thanks so much for joining us. Like, share, subscribe, comment below, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care.